everyone. Welcome to Dragon Talk. How's it going? I am Greg Tito, and as always, I'm joined by...
Me.
You. Hi,
Shelley.
Shelley. How's it going?
Great. How are you?
We've got two other fun people here.
I see them.
They're right behind us.
Hiding behind my microphone.
I see them.
No one shall see. Mr. Chris Perkins, as always. Hello. And Matthew Mercer. Hello.
Crashing your space today.
I'm so glad you're here.
Just for Dragon Talk.
Yeah, that's the only reason you
I
came
guess
up.
while you're here, you could probably talk to Chris about stuff too.
Yeah, I could do that, I guess.
Okay.
It's so nice of you guys to have me out for the short period
Yeah.
of time.
Well, you know.
Really appreciate it.
It reminds me of when you were here 2-3 years ago.
It couldn't have been that long ago.
I think it was like 2 years ago.
I think so.
Yeah, okay. That was a long time ago.
For
Talking about Waterdeep Dragon Heist.
Yes.
So
We're talking about that today too, right?
that's right.
Yep.
But I wanted to go back in the Wayback Machine when you were here so long ago.
it was.
days.
Yeah, so
we were in our old space.
right. We were
We didn't. You haven't seen our new fancy space, have you?
since then.
Since I was here last year
Oh.
briefly.
Oh.
So I got to see it in transition.
Oh.
Well, we were into the downstairs area. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh right. Yeah.
That was the transitionary phase. We're transitioning into the newer space now, which is great. But yeah, this was a long time ago. Is all what we're getting into. What is it like when Chris, you bring in folks like Matt to talk about adventures like Waterdeep Dragon?
What are you
Heist?
really talking about? Because you always say like, I'm bringing so and so in to talk about such and such. Like, what is that? What does it mean?
We're
What do you
actually
talk
talking about D&D.
What are you talking about?
That's all I ever talk about, Shelley, is D&D. There's like nothing else I can talk about.
Is it like you talk about like, here's the story, here's the part I want you to work on, here's your homework? Or is it just like, let's just brainstorm?
With a story like Dragon Heist, usually by the time we get organized enough to bring somebody in to chat with us, we have some idea of what the story is sort of going to be. Mm-hmm. At the very least, we probably have a name for it and we know where it's going to take place. With Dragon Heist, we brought in two different consultants, and Matthew was
And
the
made
second.
them fight.
Right.
Pull
By-
cue. Go for it.
Which we hadn't done that before, sort of a two-stage consulting thing. But we were so far ahead in the schedule-wise that we could actually afford to do it.
Wow.
And so the first consulting phase with Charlie Sanders was all about just, hey, we want to do a story in a city, but we're not really quite sure what that story is going to be. And then once we kind of cracked that nut and Charlie went off, several months later, we realized we want to bring in another consultant, which turned out to be Matthew, to help us slap some meat on the bones of the story and flesh out some things that we were either undecided on or that we hadn't even had a chance to think about yet.
Oh. Do you know what those things are? Or is it like you don't know what you don't know until you start talking about
A
it?
little from column A, a little from column B. Some things I sort of knew and I wanted to actually just bounce off of Matt. And other things are like, what am I missing? What have we left on the table that I can't even see? And so hopefully the fresh eyes and the fresh perspective can unlock some story ideas that we just didn't even know were there.
What was it like from your point of view?
Well, I mean, originally it was great because it felt like I got to do a college course on the history of Waterdeep taught by Chris Perkins. So, like, the first part of it was sitting in a boardroom with a whiteboard and having Chris be like, "All right, so this is the structure of the Masked Lords."
He does
and this,
your voice,
and it was well, I practice a lot when he's not around. Thanks for pointing it out. It's just a dungeon master tone. We've all kind of
That's
we
the
share
first,
tips.
first rule to being a good dungeon master. Get the tone.
Get the tone
Exactly.
right.
Immersion, guys. But yeah, so it was really great to kind of just sit there like a kid, just watching as Chris just weaves the tale of Waterdeep's, political structure and history. And then once we had that laid out, and I still have the pictures on my phone of like the elaborate lines connecting all the different
Oh, cool.
factions and everything. So for me, it was great to have the refresher. And then it was that part of them going, all right, so what do you want to do? What are your ideas? And I was like, oh, that's right, I'm here for a reason. And
Like
so
on the spot, you had a.
well, when they got me in that direction, but it was a huge honor for one thing to be brought in to help out with this. My whole life has been very much geared around Dungeons and Dragons as a huge creative inspiration for me. So to even have any sort of creative input on any stage. It's like, that was incredible for me. So I was very, very honored and touched by it. And then when we got into the meat of our discussions, which dealt with like the modular villains and developing their interests and reasons and goals as part of this Dragon Heist story, it was just such a cool space. Like any good creative writer's room, you're all sitting there and you're all writing notes on the boards feverishly, and someone has an idea and you build off that idea, and then you're like, oh, that doesn't work out because of this. Then you problem solve that and come out with this idea, and that fixes this problem, and that connects with here, and it inspires this element, and you end up looking like a bunch of conspiracy theorists, like in a crazy closet somewhere, just like sweating. Like Charlie from Charlie Day from
It's Always Sunny.
It's Always Sunny. Just like no, see, and like this guy, you look absolutely insane. But at the end of the day, it was a lot of fun. It was a good time.
We had to bring down a lot of red yarn from
exactly.
office supplies to connect all the dots.
Well, especially with the modular aspect of this.
Oh, absolutely. No, and that's the other thing too. Is every time we do this kind of thing, it's always different because you're bringing different personalities, but also the story is completely different. None of the stories we've done really kind of follow a template. Here we have urban-based adventure, relatively low level compared to some of our other stories, and 4 villains that you choose one of, 5 villains technically, but 4 each tied to a season. And that sort of guides the threats. We're very, very different from, say, I don't know, Curse of Strahd, where, okay, that story is we're going to take an old adventure and update it and then kind of build around it to show you a little bit more of the domain of Barovia. But all of our story discussions with Tracy Hickman on that story mostly focused on just talking about Strahd as the one singular threat. How everything in the story, no matter how seemingly insignificant, how everything in that story has to tie back into Strahd somehow. So everything is revolving around this one face. We didn't have those discussions on Dragon Heist because we had several villains, each operating independently within the same playground, knowing that the DMs would choose one over the others. It's just a different kind of puzzle to figure out.
Yeah. And there's so many different moving parts. I liked that this just showed a breadth of here's a toolbox that DMs can use.
Yeah, we generally like toolbox adventures, and our DMs seem to as well because they're surprisingly customizable.
Yeah,
which is an endearing trait for an adventure. I think every DM. I don't know too many DMs who run adventures exactly as published. They always like to put their own flourishes on things, and so I think that the toolbox nature means that no matter each time you play it, you're probably going to get a different result because characters are going to make different choices. They're going to fixate on different things. And so really the trick with this adventure and a lot of our other toolbox adventures is just giving DM so many toys to play with that they never run out of stuff to enjoy.
Do you guys remember what some of the discoveries were during those meetings when you were figuring out, this thing that made it in through to the book?
I remember one of the very first discussions we had dealt with Manchun as a villain, and like the idea was to kind of build it as a mystery that they don't quite know who to trust and where to go, and then eventually it would be revealed that Manchun was this driving evil force behind it, and as we began to talk about it, it became really quick to see that, well, it's hard to have a mystery story if the villain is part of the hidden villain is part of the marketing push. And it's easy to spoil, in which case, you have 16, 20, 30 hours of gameplay that essentially the mystery can be ruined by a Reddit post. And so that kind of went into the discussion of the modular villains, what were going to be secondary players you guys wanted to then bring forward as other possible antagonistic forces, and that kind of really ramped up the discussion on, well, if that's the case, what about each of these villains can make them the major antagonist? What about them could make them as interesting and easy to invest in them as an antagonist than the others? And kind of it began this. The next few days were then having each of these factions up on the board and then outlining their personality traits, outlining their various fears and worries, outlining their contacts and what factions they might be involved with and which ones they're against and what parts of the city would be their domain. And it was just kind of then focusing in on what made each of these unique, what about them made them a different type of game when you ran it. What was more swashbuckling versus what was more mafioso. What was outlining all those different themes and fleshing them out from that point.
That is super cool.
Do you guys ever think about recording these sessions? Like just having a camera in the corner, don't even think about it, and then like 3 days later, just go through that. Like eventually, I would love an edited version of what happens in these rooms.
That's pretty interesting.
We have on numerous occasions we have, but we never had the dedicated resources to actually manage it. Boop. And so that's very
and
very
the sound
professional.
guy too.
Very professional.
Yeah. I think it was actually even after you had your conversation with Matt that maybe it was Richard Witters who came to me and was like, we should just tape all these and put them up on the web and let people show them, right?
I mean, we did actually have Adam tape a few, but then I think we lost the recording. So
the lost recording.
We don't have any system to curate this content.
It's amazing.
So, but you're right. It would be amazing content, and I think a lot of people would be astonished by just how unproductive a lot of these meetings are.
But when you find that nugget, when you see like that rabbit hole and you all start to go down it, it's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I've been in rooms with game designers talking about games. Mm-hmm. Like when we had our first meetings about Betrayal Legacy and how Rob Davia was like, this should be the origin story of the house. And it was like, whoop, rabbit hole, and like 4 designers jumped in it and they were like talking, but it was like 2 hours and I just sat there like, this is amazing. Mm-hmm. Nobody's brain works like this other than like game designers.
It's a really unique place to go because it's both narrative interest in trying to build a story, but also having to build the engines and the systems that can facilitate it for a person who is not in that room.
Right.
And that's one of the most interesting facets of game design is you can create a fun story, you can create a cool system, you can design everything in that pocket, but then you have to be able to hand it to somebody who's never heard of it and have them understand.
You need to create the user interface.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a whole other challenge.
And like all the math. And then there's all like the probabilities and the math and like how many times this will happen and what scenario and how do you fix it and blah 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 blah. And like it's like this is a game that somebody gets and opens and starts to play and they have no idea like the sweat and the red yarn that went in behind the scenes for this. But it's really fascinating.
I'm going to be honest, like after we had our meeting for our developing kind of the villains and the modular aspects of Dragon Heist, we all went to our own stuff and we were busy for the next year or so. And I wasn't sure if any of it was going to make it in the book. And if I was literally like, this is kind of a really complicated system to introduce into a role-playing game story comparison to the things you guys had released. And I felt like maybe I was, our conversations were
too far.
We're too far. And like you guys said, all right, thanks, Matt. Send me back to LA. And we're like, oh, we can't use any of it.
It was a really cool conversation.
Complete waste of time.
We don't even have the content from that conversation. The recordings are lost.
Adam lose those recordings.
Oh, that's what happens.
Lost.
This never happened.
Like I legitimately began to think like, well, just prepare yourself. As with any consulting gig, you never know what contribution's going to make it in the book. And it wasn't until right before the Stream of Many Eyes when I finally got sent some of the early Bibles of the art and the design of the story that it confirmed that it made it in there. And I was like, oh, I did contribute. I was helpful.
So cool.
That's me.
I come from LA and entertainment. You're used to any creative endeavor. They're like, cool. Well, thank you for that. We might use some of it. And I've shot films and TV stuff before. We're in cutting room floor. Yeah. So you anticipate possibly, if you're lucky, having some involvement in the final product. Mm-hmm. So that was my mindset during that whole period of production where I didn't hear anything. I was like, well, I hope I didn't biff it.
Oh, that's cool. Well, now you have the finished product in your hands. You can be like, oh yeah, this is. I can see the threads of what we talked about that day.
It was actually really surreal getting the book and looking at it. Like just to have my name in there.
That's pretty cool.
That not just your name.
What?
That was crazy.
What?
That was crazy. There's a section in the book, like for me it was, when I got it, I remember it was late night, it had come in and me and my wife Mercer sat down and I opened the book and I was like, oh my God, there's my name in the credits of a D&D book. This is one of my most surreal life moments. Mm-hmm. And then I start going through it and looking at things and they're like, oh, there's this cool full page spread of the yawning portal and all this cool art of all these characters that are in there and so there's some characters from Force Grey in there that we DM. That's cool. And And there's this one.
It's like page 20.
Page 20. All right, I passed it.
That's where I was like,
I'm bad
I
at
think
this.
it's gone too far.
I did. There it is. And then over there in the small corner
yeah.
is a little Matt Mercer just chilling there in the yawning portal reading a book. And I was like, no.
You didn't tell him that was going to be in
No.
there?
I had no idea. You
Yeah.
kept that
So
to your chest
cool.
the whole time.
Yeah, I did.
That's pretty good.
One thing I can do is keep a secret.
Yeah, you can. And so I looked at it, I was like, no. And then it had a key on the back of the page, and the back of the key it
Oh
says
my
Matthew
God.
Mercer is the last one on the key. And I legitimately cried.
I was
like,
going to say, that makes me feel like I'd want to cry.
it was
a little.
it was a really genuinely emotional moment. And
The best part is that it canonically works.
Yeah.
Because I don't know whether you know this or not, but the Forgotten Realms is in the same multiverse as Earth.
Interesting.
We have
That is
mentioned a
to
few
say-
times how
that is to
Ed
say,
Greenwood
yes.
would write these articles.
Ed Greenwood wrote articles that had Elminster coming to Ed Greenwood's house in Canada and having conversations in his kitchen
With Mordenkainen, right?
with Mordenkainen.
Whoa,
Which
Ed.
basically created this, space manifold that allows us to import real-world figures into our D&D world settings. So it would be perfectly possible for you, Matt, to visit the actual Yawning Portal.
wow.
The real Matt. Yeah.
Man, be
Wow.
kind with your stat blocks, DMs.
Yeah.
Mastermind.
Yes.
Decent constitution,
subclass.
generally lower dexterity. I'm a clumsy oaf.
We basically have the Forgotten Realms because Ed Greenwood had imaginary friends when he
Yes.
was a child.
To be fair, most of us are having this conversation now because we had imaginary friends
it's true,
and
true.
wanted to write stories around them.
Well, that's what's
Monster
so
with the glasses.
in talking to my kids, and every single time they want to play with each other, it's always like, "Hey, do you want to play a game with me?" And the game is always pretend.
Yes.
They're not really playing a designed game. It's always just this, but they say it the same way that we say, like, "Oh, I'm preparing for my game tonight." It's the exact same thing, and I'm always struck by that, and it's very similar. It's just like, oh yeah, now that is the reality that we've all kind of assumed together when we're sitting down and being a part of this community.
And kids are amazing at rules
Yeah,
that they're just like, no, this is the rule. No, now we're going to add this to it too. And now this is the game. And it's
and that's just like the conversation you guys were
yeah,
having.
it's like all the threads and the rabbit holes.
Yeah,
You guys are like 5-year-olds.
they do it too.
essentially.
Isn't it weird though to think like this is his job?
Yeah.
This Perkins, this is what he does.
Yeah, it's surreal. And but it's also
somebody's job.
it has to be. And then that's one of the curious things I find about facets of entertainment. The more I learn about it is there's people out there that have worked hard to get to positions that you didn't think were possible.
Yes.
Like careers.
Yeah.
And at first glance, you're like, oh, well, you're lucky. But then you go and you can see their body of work and their path to get there. And like so much hard work gets to that point that you're like, oh, no, you just earned it and you found the path to get there. But it's just surreal to think that, like you said, it's somebody's job
somebody's
to
job.
handle that.
Well,
Right.
this guy was trying to intern at Dragon Magazine when he was like 8.
That's true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
path for you is very clear.
Yeah, well, it wasn't at the time. I honestly didn't know what I was doing, but I was pretty laser focused that I wanted to be involved with D&D somehow.
But now look.
And now look. Look at all the damage I can do.
And Matt, did you have a similar? You said being in a D&D book was an honor. Like that was something you were always thinking about, right?
Honestly,
Not necessarily working on D&D, but just that idea.
The idea of contributing any element to a story was something that I had never considered because I never thought it a possibility, if that makes sense. D&D for me was always a personal outlet for me and my friends.
Yeah.
I wasn't creating modules. I wasn't writing things for other people to consume because honestly, a lot of the time growing up, I didn't know a lot of other people that were interested in the things that I was. I was one of those kids who I was into D&D. Handful of their friends I managed to drag into it or met other people. Then we'd be like, wait, did you say Dungeons & Dragons? Do you play? Oh, okay. We'll swap numbers here. We'll talk about this. Like it felt like this kind of weird underground thing even as an adult. And so the way it shifted so heavily in recent years and to be this kind of new renaissance, this ever-growing community of being open and proud about, being a dungeon master and being a player in these games, that was not anything I could have fathomed back then. So my stories were very personal. They were my gifts to my players, and they were my creative outlets to give me a space to practice being a weird kid that did silly voices and, act when I didn't
So even
get a
then,
character in theater.
The voices were even then.
Oh yeah, no, this is all a focus for my psychosis.
Did you
so.
ever write?
Nice.
Did you ever write like a false little adventure with create a cover and put maps inside and sort of create it as a thing, as an actual object?
I actually never have.
Oh, okay.
It's all been chicken scratch for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you?
I totally did.
Oh, I can
Do you
see
have
that.
those?
It makes sense for
That was a
you.
leading question.
Do you have those?
Sadly, no.
Oh.
I know it's
You
heartbreaking.
could sell those to Alex
I-
Kammer for $1 million.
Yeah.
It's honestly probably my only regret in life is I didn't keep any of the content that I created like between the ages of 10 and 16 because I was putting out. I mean, I was.
I bet. Ed Greenwood. Jr.
256 pages,
Yeah.
put to shame.
Everybody else had, boyfriends and girlfriends. I had my D&D modules that I was
Way
creating
cooler.
with construction paper covers. I did the artwork on the fronts and the backs of these modules. I glued the maps on the inside covers. I made.
Why don't we have these?
I'm just crying on the inside.
I love
Shelley.
this so much. This
I do
is so
too.
great.
And
Oh my god.
Did any of the ideas that you had then make it into future
No,
things?
they
Do you
were
remember any
terrible.
of it?
Do you remember any of them?
in hindsight, they were not great.
Like
just
Chris
saying.
Perkins now, would you just edit the crap out of Chris Perkins then? Just ruin that kid. Just crush his dream.
I'd be like, you don't have a future.
What is this? This is a map? You have no future.
So many people
amateur.
think about going back in time to talk to their younger selves. You're like, it'll get better, buddy. It's fine. But no, Chris Perkins is
Keep
like,
your day job, kid.
Don't keep up teaching.
All you've got is nice handwriting.
Yeah, pretty much. And so
it's legible. I'll
Yeah.
give it that.
I was so good with handwriting and covers that I actually could duplicate Helvetica with my
my
hand.
God.
It was
Wow.
really bad.
That's really good.
But I wish I had those because there were must have done dozens of them. These modules,
Do you
and not
remember
just
the
for
names?
D&D, but also for other games as well. Like I made Star Frontiers modules and Top
way.
Secret modules, and
No way.
all kinds of crazy crap.
was
Yeah, out of folders and
Meant to
stuff.
be.
And I don't have any of it. It makes me so sad.
Oh man.
Because
Was
I
one
could
of them
buy a
called?
house in Bermuda.
One of them was called Curse of Strahd. Another one was
No,
Dragon Heist.
Yeah, no, nothing like that.
We're all cribbing your notes from.
Nothing like that. I'm actually, while we're talking, I was trying to think if I could even remember a title of one of those old adventures.
Oh, you have to.
And I can't remember.
I remember my old poetry from middle school.
You do? Can you recite it now?
I think I have. Haven't I done this spoken word for you?
You might have actually.
This one's called The Sea.
Go on.
I took a walk down by the sea. No one was there, only me.
Profound.
You can't even get it out.
It's so good. Oh man,
That's
I
like a
have
Hall
my
& Oates song.
diary from when I was 10. That is gold.
Oh man, I can only fathom.
Why don't boys like me? It's like, oh, Shelly, 10. Shit, 10-year-old Shelly. It doesn't get better.
You're an amateur. You'll never get a boyfriend.
Speaking of poetry, I was addicted to the old adventure. So, Dragon Heist and all the other adventures I've written over the years really are, for me, a reflection of my love just for the genre of adventure writing, which is, not a major genre, a literary genre or anything like that. It's a very
For
niche
now.
kind
It
of.
will be.
It will be, but it's a very
been on the
it's a very
bestseller
niche.
list.
It has.
So
True.
it's legit.
For
Oh,
nonfiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nonfiction.
But it's a really good story.
But I have a great love for and fondness of those really old modules that sort of defined for a lot of people back in first edition what a D&D adventure was. And I learned my craft basically through imitation, by imitating them as closely as possible. And I can't imagine I'd be here if those hadn't pioneered the style and the way that we actually write adventures.
Yeah.
And so I think imitation is the highest form of flattery. And I still feel like I'm imitating to a large extent, even with the new story.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said about.
Yeah, we dress it up better now.
Yeah,
than we
taking
used to, but
taking the core of what was pioneered back then, and then bringing it up to current standards and making
Yes.
it feel like it's there.
Well,
well, one of the casualties, and talking about poetry, one of the casualties of having absorbed all those old adventures is I've still got some poetry from those adventures lodged in my brain.
You do?
Yes. Like, for instance, in Module S2, White Plume Mountain, you are set off on a mission to retrieve 3 lost magic items by a poem. And I still have that entire poem stuck in my goddamn head.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, man, I'm pretty sure I have a poem written somewhere from a puzzle that I did back like 20 years ago, where it was a puzzle where you had all these different pieces of stone that were all kind of variations of triangles and different angular shapes that fit into a perfect square, but you could also fit them into a larger square. And the idea with the puzzle was you had to take the pieces and make it from the larger square into the smaller square. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. And it took my party, like, I think, an hour and 30 minutes. That was when I realized maybe some puzzles don't work as well in a role-playing game.
We're never playing this D&D game again.
They were really excited for about 10 minutes, and they were like, "No, this was a terrible idea, man.
Yeah.
Can we just cast
My
something on
mom's
this?"
gonna be here in 5
Yeah.
minutes. Can you just give us the answer?
But the clues to it were like this dwarven poem that spoke of like ancient dwarven kings of 4 fortresses, but their fortresses got smaller as part of their land. So I was trying to tell them how to solve the puzzle and part of it, and I was so proud of it, and none of them got it, and it's purely my fault for not being very like clear with the message, and it was a completely failed puzzle.
You're like, the
experience.
clues are right there.
Yeah, well, you know how it is. That moment for a DM is like, okay, no, you want to just roll an intelligence check, just in case you get an idea. A 4. Okay. All right.
A 4.
I'm just going to get a sandwich. You guys keep going.
It's a square.
3 trolls show up.
These uncultured gits can't understand my puzzle.
Am I that esoteric?
That's just a bad puzzle. It's just a really bad puzzle. That's my fault.
Puzzles are tough, and that's why when we were doing the Stream Many Eyes, I was like, "There's no way this isn't going to work unless someone who just was well versed at puzzles wasn't going to bring that to life, right?" And Elisa Teague just did an amazing job of making sure that they were just hard enough to keep the tension going, but then that they could get solved in the time limit that we had, and that is super hard.
I will say we're also benefiting from the era of the escape room.
Yes.
Where now people, especially adults, have now gotten back into being like, I can problem solving in a puzzle atmosphere with a timed, element into it. The people who are now starting to, who are in generally a gamer type genre, are a little more open to that idea. 15 years ago, not so much. When a puzzle came up in a D&D game, you'd hear the collective sigh. Like, I'm like, what? I spent like 4 hours building this for you guys. You're going to enjoy it.
This advances the
Stab
plot.
this puzzle.
This advances the plot. So true. You're not going to get any plot unless you finish this.
I cast magic missile on this puzzle.
It bounces back. You're dead.
You can't actually do that, Shelley, because magic missile targets a creature, and a puzzle's not a creature.
I
think you just got served.
did.
Yeah.
Oh,
Nice.
snap.
So it was awesome seeing you at the Stream of Many Eyes. I thought the game that you ran was amazing and super fun.
It was fun. It was fun for a couple reasons. Because when I was told I was going to be opening the first stream game, I was like, oh, okay. How do I kick this off when we're going into this kind of urban environment? And I knew the next day there was going to be the masquerade kind of pseudo LARP experience that was happening on Saturday. So I wrote a story that was kind of a prelude to that. And I know I had Deb, I had Matt Lillard, I had Joe Manganello. Joe's one of my favorite players because he is just such an archetype of heroic player that just wants to get in there and muck things up and just destroy. And it's awesome. I love playing with him. And so I wanted to think, what could be the most subversive way to start this with a character like him? And I know he was playing a Minotaur Brute with like the UA Brute class that was out there. I'm going to make it a dinner party. I'm going to make it a dinner party where they're trying to extract information and not kill the dude. And it still eventually went to blows because that was going to happen.
And they're serving meatloaf.
So we ended up. It was one of those ways where how can I make this different from what was expected and kind of subvert the players' expectations and such. We got to have Deborah's character, who's a great barbarian who was in 4th grade, to dip a Minotaur as part of a dancing sequence at a dinner party. I got a lot of wonderful, weird moments out of that game that I was pretty happy with.
It's pretty sweet. Yeah, I loved that it was. I think it was the perfect way to go from like the adventure of Tomb of Annihilation that was so much about jungles and the lost gods and all of this kind of swashbuckling adventure to a dinner party.
Yeah,
and
just make it a little different.
Switch it up.
That was my first time I had a chance to play with Kate.
Yes,
Actually.
yeah.
We've been talking online, and especially since she started working here, we kept like just missing each other at events. And so literally the first time we had a chance to meet in person was like, "Hi, let me look at your character.
Oh, wow.
We're playing in 10 minutes." And I think that's probably the best way you can meet somebody is
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
go to the table with the character and then role play for a couple hours, and then be like, "So what? How are you?
Right.
Nice to meet you."
I feel like I have this intimate knowledge with you just of how you played your
Take
character over
17
the last
points of
2 hours.
damage.
Yeah, man.
Coincidentally, that's the same way I first met Kate.
Oh, really?
Yes, I had never met her until she came in to do the Make-A-Wish game. This is before she was a Wizards employee. She
That's
came
right.
in with
As a
Patrick
member of the C
Rothfuss
team.
and the Penny Arcade guys to participate in our Make-A-Wish game with Mr. Nolan Whale.
That's super cool.
Oh, no way. I
And
didn't know she
so-
was part of that.
Yeah, she was. So volunteered her time very generously, and
That's awesome.
yeah.
And the rest is history.
And-
Yeah, but she was amazing that whole weekend. I think we counted up. She was the one who was on camera the most over the entire weekend.
I love it.
Yeah, from playing in your game, she was on. She did the off the table stuff. Yeah, fantastic.
And Deb knocked it out of the park too.
Oh,
Like,
so
she-
good.
I remember years ago when we had just found out that Deb Randwall, who we're talking about, was a huge D&D fan. Like, oh man, would she be interested at all in becoming a guest on Critical Role? Like Sam Regal, one of our players' wife, had shot a thing with her and we could contact her, and so she asked her, and she was like, response was very sweet. It was like, "Thank you, but Dungeons and Dragons on the internet scares me. It's something very personal to me, and
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Yeah,
want to share
sure.
that on a space where
That makes
it's
sense.
liable going to be torn apart."
Yeah.
And I totally get it. So I know for her to be part of even just Force Grey, the season that she was on, was a big kind of step
Yep.
into kind of allowing that vulnerability out in a public floor, and then to run a game during that stream
Yeah, that
was
was
another
huge.
huge step.
What a game.
And she did such a great job.
Yeah,
I
nailed
was
it.
so happy.
My wife, who is not a huge D&D player, not really in the culture at all, she was in the audience for that, and she was like, "I didn't know that's what D&D could be like." And she was feeling it. She was talking about it like weeks afterwards.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm still thinking about what happened in that game. And I'm thinking specifically of the moment where and Deb's trying to round it out really quickly, but then she's like, "And it's her 13th birthday," and you audibly go, "Oh."
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those moments like I can play it off like, yeah, well, my in-game character didn't know, but I know the whole time. No, I was so focused on the things that were right in front of my character that information that I should have picked up much earlier just completely bypassed me. And it wasn't until that moment that it was like the memento sequence where all of a sudden all memories clicked. Oh, come on, Matt. What's wrong with you?
Which is so it was amazing that she could
was
elicit
great.
that in someone who, all of you guys, the players, were expert players,
man.
right? To be able to get that was, I want, everyone. I keep pointing to, even folks who don't have any knowledge of Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that, watch that game because that is the perfect gateway drug.
Yeah, it's a great example of what it can be, and an example of pretty much anybody can come to the table and make a great game no matter how nervous they might be. That's the thing, because she was super nervous before going on there, understandably. And people ask me all the time, aren't you nervous running the game every week or doing all these streams? I'm like, yes. It never goes away.
Yeah.
and
does.
it's okay to be nervous. Especially people, it's their first game not streamed, just at home. They're just like, how do you deal with this? I'm like, you just kind of learn.
Just soak it up.
Yeah, but you brought that up because she said it's very personal for me, and D&D on the internet scares me. So how is it for you when? I mean, it sounds like it's very personal for you too.
It is, and it was part of our, because it wasn't our idea originally to stream. We were approached by Felicia Day to do it on Geek and Sundry when she'd heard about it, and we had a lot of long conversations. Like, this would be really cool for these reasons, but also this is our personal home game.
Yeah.
And if I've learned anything in geek circuits over the years on the internet is things can get hated very quickly if it's not exactly as expected, or if people, especially the history of tabletop gaming, unfortunately comes with some connotations of like gatekeeping and people not being as welcoming. That's changed dramatically in recent years, thankfully, and it's going in a much better direction. But for those reasons, we were very reticent to kind of open ourselves up to this thing that we all loved as friends at home. And
why poison a good thing?
Right.
kind of, and that's why we said we'll do this for a few weeks. We'll see if it goes anywhere. If it gets really bad and we're uncomfortable with it, we'll just go back home. And really, genuinely surprised and excited to see that the response was so positive and the community that grew around it. And yeah, we were really happy to see that it wasn't this horrible flaming wreck we were expecting it to be. And yeah, it's still nerve-wracking. It's still a lot. I remember the new campaign, the very first episode that we streamed back in January. Mm-hmm. We specifically were trying to avoid any numbers of people that were watching it, because some of the players were really nervous about, oh my God, I hope they don't hate my character. I hope it's fun. I hope we have a good time. We haven't done a new campaign like this together in 5 years. Let's go ahead and do it. And then 5 minutes out, someone just throws out, all right, guys, well, I guess across all platforms, we're like over 100,000 live viewers. And you watch the entire table just turn pale.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, okay, guys, let's rally and do this.
Live viewers?
Yeah.
Over 100,000.
It was crazy.
You got like Wembley Stadium watching you, right?
Everybody
Like,
at the
that's
same
insane.
moments thinking, is this the accent that I really want for my character?
Yeah, yeah. And even some of those shifted a few episodes into the campaign.
Yeah, right.
It was hilarious.
Well, you guys had the benefit of having a year and a half under your belts before going live, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that, your characters were cemented.
Exactly.
By that point.
So to go in fresh with the expectation of a community that had been through the whole previous campaign, that was the big issue. All the players were having kind of an existential crisis of like, this character, I'm excited to play, but what if they don't like it? And the conversation kept coming down to, this isn't about the audience.
Yeah.
I know you're worrying about that, but this is about you. Are you having fun? That's all that matters. And they might like it, they might not. But this is inherently, it's still the core our game, and we're playing this as friends. This is our time every week to kind of check in and be creative and hang out in a space that we get to do this.
And it's that authenticity and personality that drives all kind of creative endeavors, really. I mean, I think
so,
I think
yeah.
people in bands,
Yeah.
people in the theater, they're still always thinking of those same doubts, those same like, is this going to be good? Is this going to be worthwhile for people to watch? But ultimately, it just comes from, are you personally invested in this project or in this thing? And then that, dedication or commitment comes through.
I think so, too.
I hope so, anyway.
I think as a storyteller too, in the role of the DM, at least for me, the people that I am creating the story for are the players.
Right.
Other people can watch and participate in the story in various different ways, but for me as a DM, when I sit down to decide what I'm going to do in a given session, it's always, is this going to make my players just really crackle with glee?
Yeah. Which is one of the early discussions we had with Twitch as a format. Mm-hmm. Was there's all these interactive elements you can add to it, and the audience can participate and adjust, and the people that were helming the Geek and Sundry Twitch stream at the time were very much like, let's find how many ways we can, have the audience be able to change and manipulate and affect it. And I kept putting my foot down and saying, this isn't for them. This is for us, and they're allowed to watch if they want to. And that's been kind of a hardline rule from the beginning, that the minute that it no longer becomes fun for us and becomes our thing as friends, then it's not worth doing.
Yeah.
And there are streams out there that do a great job with it. That's not knocking that by any means, but just for us and for our reasons of doing it, for that similar reason, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't ever creating a game for an audience. I wanted to create it for the players and for my friends.
Yeah, they're the best audience. Right, I mean, they're the ones who are like, going to rah and cheer you too,
and it's their characters who are helping driving the story, and their decisions that are propelling it. So
that's the thing too, is like for people who are new to this, or at least have maybe not dungeon mastered themselves, a lot of them will go to Chris and go to me and be like, "You guys weave such incredible stories. Thank you for this." And you're like, "We're happy to have been a catalyst." But you need to give credit to the players equally, because they are bringing as much to the table, sometimes if not more, in building these great narratives. We're setting the scenes. We're helping weave checkpoints and threads that they can pick up, but they take it in directions that we don't expect in so many ways that elevate it beyond anything we could have expected. And just I feel like there's a knee-jerk reaction to give the credit to us when really like it's deserved all across the table.
Exactly. I feel like my role as a DM is to sort of sit back and postulate, what if?
Yeah.
I'm going to create a what if situation. What if this were to happen? with no necessary expectation of how it's going to unfold, because random dice rolls and player aegis will kind of take it from there.
Yeah.
With the live games in particular, Acquisitions Inc., I learned a hard lesson early on, which is I can really only set the scene. After that, I have no idea where the story's going to go.
Yeah.
These guys are just so
That would be scary.
out in left field sometimes that it really becomes a shared improvisational experience at that point.
Man, especially that crew.
Especially that crew.
Even before we started streaming, I remember seeing like the early Acquisitions Inc. live games, and I was like, this poor guy. I do not
Who
envy
would
you.
ever be a GM live in front of people?
Like
Crazy.
yeah, audience is watching it like, this is so much fun. As a person who's been DMing most of his life, I just remember watching these videos going like, I'm so sorry.
Are you
I
okay?
feel you, buddy.
But you always seem like you're really enjoying it.
Well,
You hold your own.
I'm fine. Yeah.
Well, you can enjoy it and
Right,
still be
yes.
going,
And still be
what is
terrified.
Yeah,
happening?
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's half the fun, actually. Like, I think the adrenaline that kicks in
Yes.
when you're thrown off of your number of possibly prepared tracks is where the real joy of dungeon mastering kicks in. When
Yes.
that whole page just gets thrown out, you're like, all right, guys, let's see where this is going. You know, those are the craziest and most memorable
Yes.
Well,
experiences.
I think that's
That's
where
when they meet the real Chris Perkins in Renton. Seriously, I mean,
You did do that, didn't you?
yeah, there was one live game where they hopped in a strange, funky, magical machine, and they traveled through time and space to Renton, Washington, and broke into the Wizards of
Into
the
that-
Coast headquarters.
Oh yeah.
That was not planned.
That's like, where you? All right.
Yeah.
We're going there.
Man.
that was
That's good times.
Me sniffing too much something.
Was that when you were? Yeah, I remember that one now. So shifting tracks a little bit. So when you're doing voiceover work for games, you don't get that much leeway, right? When you don't get to
No, you don't get
improvise.
any.
Yeah,
You know, we're the hired talent. The client has a very strong idea, and to be fair, that's part of the kind of relationship and the trust you have as an actor. Is we are only given a part of the tapestry that our character is involved in. The director and the producers in these titles, they can see the entire piece, or at least hopefully they do. So you kind of have to trust that their direction, their instincts, even if it's different from what you're expecting to do, are correct, because they can see where it's going to fit and how it's going to weave into the whole final product. But yeah, we have very little control going in there. There is some collaboration.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, because the Pillars of Eternity, Deadfire, right? That's what
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
called. That had a bunch of the Critical Role cast participating, right?
Yeah, but that was a special scenario, because usually when you go in, there is I'll dial it back a little bit. There is some collaboration in the nature of the performance, but like for the most part, the dialogue is locked in. You know, you don't really have any influence in the story or narrative at all. And Pillars of Eternity, which is an RPG series that I loved. I kickstarted the first one before I was even involved with it, and as a kind of spiritual successor to the classic kind of isometric Baldur's Gate RPGs. Like that's my jam.
Yeah.
So to be part of that was great, but for the sequel, the fact that we were able to bring not just us as a cast for the main characters for the story, but to then bring our Critical Role campaign 1 characters into the game as a DLC that you could then build with our voice clips was one of the most surreal experiences I think I'll ever have in my life.
Why? What made it so weird? Just because it was this characters you've had for 4 years being immortalized in this way?
Kind of, but also envision these characters that you play still, though it's on camera to a certain extent, still privately amongst your friends, and you're improvising the space and you don't know what's going to happen. Having a team of writers submit you a script for approval where they've written dialogue
God,
for
no,
your
that's
RPG
weird.
You've been
characters.
your own script writer for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then reading through and going, oh, wow, these people have actually watched a lot of the show, researched them, and have a really good feel for their
Oh,
voice.
good. I thought you were going to say the opposite.
No, that was our worry initially, was like, oh, I hope they're okay with us giving them harsh feedback.
Yeah.
But they were fans of the show, and they knew him very well, and they did a great job writing the dialogue. And so we went back and forth and like added stuff to it, and we collaborated on the script there. And then going into record in a recording studio as your D&D character
Yeah.
we're all voice actors. We've been doing this for years and years, but not one of us didn't walk in there to record our D&D character and go, this feels really strange.
It's like worlds colliding.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a crazy crossover that I never would have expected, and then when the game came out and getting to sit there and customize the characters in the game and then play around in a full party of them and hearing all my friends in their D&D party shouting battle cries and stuff, it was very cool and very surreal.
They recorded all the barks and all the things that people had to say, so you're like, oh, that's so and so. Yeah, right. Yeah,
like go ahead and put Scanlan in your party, and he's like, ain't no party like a Scanlan party because a Scanlan party makes you criminally complicit. And like cute little things like that I wasn't present for the recording, so it's even catching me off guard. And I'm laughing,
nice.
And
I love that.
It was big ups to Obsidian for not just having the idea of this collaboration, but working with us on it and kind of making this one of this nerd boys unexpected dreams come true. I guess it was wild.
You could not have imagined any of this when you were Felicia first approached you.
Not at all.
Also, were you thinking people want to watch people play D&D?
Yeah. I mean,
that's weird.
Outside,
I remember thinking that.
I thought that too.
Oh yeah.
Like we brought up the Acquisition Seek live shows when we had those first meetings because like that's like it's an auditorium setting. Mm-hmm. They're like professional creatives up there on stage or a bunch.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of air quotes in there.
It's always that outside looking in perspective,
right,
You're like I'm a meager waste of space. Everyone else not me. It's that imposter syndrome thing where you're just like everybody out there is much better at what they do. They don't know that I'm bad at what I do yet. Try and hide it.
They just don't know.
Yeah, but it's a real feeling. And so in those early meetings, we're like, they will go see a live show at a convention for gaming.
Yes.
With all these personalities who are like professional writers and the Penny Arcade guys and like the guy who writes D&D. Like that makes sense. We're a bunch of voice actor nobodies doing this on the internet. Like, why would anybody care? And so we just went, you know what? We'll give it a shot. Mm-hmm. They kept wanting to gamify it a bit, because you have producers in web media. They're like, how about if you play the RPG and then for the boss fight, you jump over to the PC and you play the boss in the computer game? We're like, that is a terrible idea. We just want to play our game. And so Twitch as the format was the one that allowed us. We're like, look, if you just put cameras in the room and we just play our game as we've always played it, we'll try that.
We'll do our funny voices like we always do.
Yeah, we'll just
it'll be fine.
We'll be stupid.
And who knows where
adults.
the story will go?
Yeah.
Like last week.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. Well, no spoilers, but last week's episode of Critical Role went really, really far off where I was expecting it to go.
I love those episodes.
Oh, they're great.
They're the best.
They're great. And the next episode's gonna be real interesting.
As you try to get it back on track,
or just to see what the ramifications are of the things that transpired.
Yes.
Needless to say, they've acquired a new means of transportation, and in the doing so may have alienated a city.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
And there's probably going to be some real deep philosophical conversations between the party next session.
It's so funny how many dungeon masters
They may
I
literally
follow.
jump a shark next week.
No, that's good. All right. Gotta get that in there.
Work that in.
Yeah.
I did allude to a shark at the end of the last episode, so it could
Oh,
work.
there you go.
There we go. It was just funny how many dungeon masters I follow on Twitter who are watching and we're like, oh, it was similar to your concern for Chris for Acquisitions Incorporated. They're like, oh man, these are the worst/best sessions.
Yep.
Let's see how it goes from here.
And it all stems from like a couple of quick decisions that may not be the most optimal choice, but the dice roll will be fine, and then the dice rolls poorly. And then the next dice rolls poorly, and then it's just this kind of spiral of absolute chaos, and the players are stressed and trying to figure it out, and then each thing they think is going to work doesn't, or not in the way they expect because of just the way it's set up. And then by the end of it, you all stop and go, "What just happened? How did that happen?"
I think
that was amazing.
One of the fascinating things about adventure writing, just sort of take it back to the books, is you can't anticipate that when you're writing the adventure. You've just got to put all the toys out and know that as soon as they start interacting with it, things are going to go sideways. Decisions are going to be made that are not expected. I think the goal narratively is just to make sure that there's enough in an adventure that a DM doesn't feel like they're completely out to sea when things do go haywire.
They've got the ammunition to bring it to the story whenever they need to.
But there's some places in Dragon Heist where we inserted things that we know could have serious narrative consequences for campaigns. Like as soon as you put a submarine in an adventure,
That changes everything.
the characters could get their hands on it, and then, well, there we go.
And they may not want to be in
20,000
Waterdeep
Leagues Under
anymore.
the Sea
Oh
is
my
now our new
God.
campaign.
Exactly.
Yeah, so-
and that's going to be a fun campaign too.
But it was all done consciously, and I think that's the key.
Well, I do want to say I did a session. It's my third one of a Waterdeep Dragon Heist campaign, and it's 2 new players. One hasn't played ever, and the other one didn't play since the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And after, this was our third session, we were kind of going through some of the introductory dungeons in here. The player who hadn't played since the 80s said, he's like, man, this is very different from what I remember when I was playing. It was very much like go into a room, kill monsters, go to the
Right.
next room, kill monsters. And he was like, it was at the tail end of when we were playing, there was this one adventure that was different. And it totally changed our ideas of what it was. And this was, a 10-year-old kid at the time who was like going through this. And he's like, oh, what was the name of it? It was Ravenloft. It was, and I was like, oh, I6 from. And I started. By the way, I've spoken to Chris Perkins and Tracy Hickman, the writer of that story, about all that. But I did remember that conversation because it was so. I think you had said that same exact quote where it was like that was the one that added story, that added this ongoing narrative throughout and tied all of the rooms together to make it something. And I just thought it was very striking that this person who had been out of Dungeons and Dragons for 30 years really had that same thought and was reminded of that playing this adventure, because he knew that there was all of these things that are happening, all these threads that could be pulled upon. And he's excited to play more.
Yeah.
And
Off that bit too, if you're a dungeon master who's really only run each campaign once or any sort of scenario once, I highly recommend you have the opportunity, even it's just like, especially for one shots, to try and run the same scenario for multiple kinds of groups, especially if you're looking to ever write any sort of adventure modules or stories in the future. It really helps to have that perspective to see how the exact same scenario can be played so radically differently based on the different players' choices that are made. I have a number of one-shots that I've built over the years for like friends' birthday parties and events that just I'd do for friends, and I'd run that same scenario for different groups, and just seeing how wildly different each adventure ends up swinging and how they end up finding their way to the end of it is such a unique and wonderful ride that helps inform your design choices going forward for anything you plan to write or run in the future.
right.
And I've learned a lot. An adventure I ran for Joe Manganiello, actually, the first time I ever played a game with him, I ran it at one shot that I had written years before and had played for like 3 or 4 different times with other groups, where it had this whole like, a corrupt a swamp that had like its fane was being corrupted by some entity, and there was a druid leader there that themselves, because they were bound to this swamp, they were beginning to slowly feel the corruption, and it was kind of like rotting their body, and they're supposed to be given this quest to go do that. And a few of the stories went that route. Some of them just wanted to ask the townsfolk. Ran it for Joe, missed that whole thread, and ended up going, like, trying to kill these 2 gnomes that stole money from them in a tavern, found out about a group of smugglers in the town, found their warehouse, burned it to the ground, killed most of them in there, almost killed one of their leaders, burned his face, and then healed him again, just enough to get the information, and then killed him. And it turned into this whole different like Die Hard movie scenario that I'd never expected. But then that one shot now has a whole other facet that I've
were
now
you
built
making
in the
that
world.
up on the fly?
Yeah.
Then? Like he's like, oh, now we're in a warehouse. Okay.
Yeah, a whole criminal
Oh.
faction that I didn't have prepared for this one shot that was just supposed to be this little kind of bottle episode, fun, like go save the druid seer. Nope.
Screw that seer. Get him out of here.
Yep.
There's always one.
I
There's
love
always
how
that one.
I love how this is basically a Rorschach test as well. Like,
Kind of, yeah.
and Dragon Heist has so many different ways to play
does.
through
And
it.
one of the advantages of sending an adventure out to playtesting is you get exactly that all in one big wad. When the playtest feedback comes in and you realize, 200 groups played this adventure and none of them had the same experience.
Yeah.
And in some cases, DMs made decisions that kind of took things off on a weird path, or would make spontaneous decisions like switching the villain because they were having so much fun pursuing this other lead.
Yeah, so
and
why?
it just sort of led them in a different direction. It's like, okay, well, functioning as intended, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so when you get feedback like that, would you say working as intended or, oh no, this is broken? Or like 200 groups never.
Sometimes it's broken. People will hit some part of the adventure which they didn't understand
All right.
because it was badly written or badly framed or it just wasn't fun. And several groups would say, this one encounter here was too tough. 4 of our 5 characters died.
Oh.
It's like, oh, well, I can fix that.
Oopsie.
Yeah.
We got to make sure 5 out of 5 of those characters die.
Yeah, exactly.
Four.
True Perkins test.
It's the first
Failed
encounter.
me, Dungeon
Why is the
Master.
first encounter so hard?
Oh my gosh. Well, speaking of which, Kenku killed all my characters.
Okay.
So there you go.
And I was like, all right. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you can, without spoiling anything, what were some of the weirder choices the DMs took that you weren't expecting?
Oh gosh, one of them was the party spent a great deal of time in the old Zoblob shop, which is this. There's like one paragraph or 2 paragraphs written about it in the adventure about this gnome that runs a shop that has a stuffed beholder in the window. And for some reason, a particular group of players were so determined that there was some kind of mischief going on there.
That's funny.
That they were tearing the whole place apart. They were analyzing everything. They were magically interrogating the gnome, even though they knew it was illegal. And so this whole, the entire campaign just started to center around this tiny little shop. Not intended, of course.
My players have loved that shop as well. Yeah.
Well,
'Cause it's all
groups will
purple in the
fix-
shop.
Of course. That
was the thing that was
shop
like
is
this-
purple. So they're thinking,
I would be suspicious,
We have
too.
to figure out
Purple.
what's going on with this
Really?
weird ass shop with
Yeah.
the stuffed beholder. There
Was
must-
it like a taxidermied beholder or
Yeah.
like a plushie
a
beholder?
taxidermied beholder?
Okay. Yeah,
So
I'm suspicious.
yeah, clearly suspicious.
Yeah, well, it's hard to properly treat far plane flesh too. That dissolves pretty quick.
Yeah. And there was another
paper
one
mache.
where
Yeah.
they had to chase this sort of automated man, this construct that looks like a swashbuckler, across rooftops, and apparently they were having really some trouble with the chase rules actually catching him.
Oh, okay.
And so the whole thing basically been this is sort of, draft a bunch of townsfolk to help you sweep an entire ward of the city in this sort of methodical police hunt manner for this creature. It's like, wow, the adventure did not account for you, dragooning an entire city ward for this. But the DM was able to manage it just fine.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love
So
that.
what are your favorite types of players when you're a DM? And then what are your least favorite types of players? Asking as a player.
Right. And then,
How can I improve my playingdom?
Yes. What should I not do?
for me personally, and in this thing personally, because it changes from player to player, table to table, I really appreciate players that are very respectful to the other players and listen. Mm-hmm. I've had games in the past where you have some players that are really into the idea of them being the hero
Yeah.
and wanting to constantly step into that light and kind of treat the rest of the party like their sidekicks, or their groupies. And that is not conducive. So for me, the type of player that listens and is respectful to the other players to share that spotlight and to be collaborative in that storytelling is huge. Mm-hmm. Players that are interested in not always dealing with every conflict with combat, who are
Right.
willing to find other avenues. It's very easy, especially if you're used to the older editions in some cases, or if you play a lot of video games, to be like, well, there's creatures, fight and kill them, take gold.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Murder
so,
hobo.
I
yeah.
like players who understand their characters' strengths and weaknesses really well, and they're okay with the weaknesses in their characters, and they use that to drive their characters' decisions and to help therefore drive the story. Flawed characters are inherently more interesting story-wise anyway, but one of my favorite things to watch is a player come to the conclusion that this is what the character should do, but this is what the character is going to do because this is how the character would react to the situation.
Yeah.
When you see the player having that little internal monologue and that moment of indecision, should I min-max the situation for the party's benefit, or should I play the character as we all know the
Right.
character should be played? I love those internal little moments of tension and watching as the player says, nope, I'm going to do what the character would do in this situation.
And then watch the rest of the party react with, what are you doing?
Right.
But also
Yeah.
going like,
yeah,
makes sense.
totally a character.
And that's the essence of
Our
D&D
our
too.
bad for having a barbarian.
Yep.
Well, excellent. I love the work that was put laying down the foundations for Waterdeep with you guys, and the final product is looking like a lot of people are enjoying it as an introductory adventure too. I don't know if that was an intention, but it's become
yes, absolutely.
the conversation a lot for
Yeah.
folks to jump in, and it's been working really well with my group.
I've certainly had fun running it on Dice Camera Action. Although I'm not running the adventure as written, I'm sort of doing a riff.
Right. Yeah, because they were already a higher level to begin with.
Yeah, my characters are 11th level, and they're going through this level 1 to 5 adventure, and you'd think they'd be stomping right through it, but no,
I wonder why.
they're suboptimal.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys, for everything. This is amazing.
Thank
Yeah.
you for having us, guys.
Yeah.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you. Always fun.
Folks on the Twitches, we will take a short break and be back with a special Lore You Should Know segment, not with Mr. Chris Perkins.
Right.
We're going to have Ari Levitch join the table here and discuss some of the guilds of Ravnica in preparation for Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica coming out next month. No, 2 months. No, November. So we'll be back in just a couple minutes. We're going to take a short break. See ya. Bye.
Bye.